In verse 41, John 12, these things Isaiah said because he saw His glory. Whose glory? The Son's glory. And he spoke of Him. So who is this that Isaiah is seeing seated upon the throne? It is the Son of God. Now, Barnes writes, John affirms that it was the glory of the Messiah that Isaiah saw, and yet Isaiah affirms that it was Jehovah. And from this, the inference is irresistible that John regarded Jesus as the Jehovah whom Isaiah saw. The name Jehovah is never in the Scriptures applied to a man or an angel or to any creature. It is the peculiar, incommunicable name of God. This passage is therefore conclusive proof that Christ is equal with the Father. James Montgomery Boyce writes, what Isaiah saw was the closest thing in all of Jewish writings or tradition to an actual portrait of the living and holy God. Yet that vision, with all its breathtaking splendor, John applies to Jesus. Without questioning, it would seem, John takes the most exalted vision of God in the Old Testament and says it was a portrait of a carpenter from Nazareth who was about to be crucified. So great is John's opinion of Him. Now think about this. This is astounding. Such is John's opinion of Jesus. Now, he walked with Him. He talked with Him. This lowly carpenter. There was no, it's not like the Jesus movies. From what I see in Scripture, He wasn't necessarily physically attractive. He wasn't taller than everyone else, like King Saul. There was nothing that would draw us to Him physically. He was chased out of the temple, had to hide Himself. He was beaten and mauled, ridiculed and mocked, and yet John, such is John's opinion of Him, that this one hanging on a tree is the one Isaiah saw, that seraphim could not gaze upon. What's your opinion of Him? I don't care about this or that. I just want to know, what is your opinion of Him? When I meet men, I may disagree with them on certain things of theology, but I want to know what is their opinion of the Son of God. And in that opinion, I can have fellowship. They might not stand toe to toe with me on everything. I want to know what is their opinion. And oftentimes I meet men who do not agree with me on some aspects of theology, and yet their opinion of Jesus Christ is much greater than my own. And that is a rebuke. If I wanted to know something about the relationship I was going to have with you, I would probably ask you, what is your opinion of my little boy Ian or my little boy Evan? And that would definitely influence my relationship with you. Be careful. Those of us who concern ourselves with theology, the young men who think theology is extremely important, and they are right, would be very, very careful. With all your learning, what is your opinion of Jesus? And is that opinion lived out? Is it lived out? You know, when I see a young man who follows Jesus cautiously, it scares me. Who's so conservative in the use of his energy. And when I see young men who are like bulls in a china shop, who tear up more than they fix, who are running wild, preaching to everything that moves, staying up all night, witnessing and getting 3 hours of sleep a night, That doesn't bother me. I'm not going to tell him he needs to back off. I'm not going to tell him that he needs to realize that the Christian life is a marathon and not a race. I'm going to tell him to go. While you have energy, go. Because there'll come a day when you won't have that great amount of energy. While you've got it, live for Christ. Burn out for Christ while you've got it. Now I know that goes against what most people teach. But I would rather have you lavish yourself upon Christ while you can than to grow old and dull without ever having made yourself a drink offering poured out to Christ. Live for Him. Live for Him. May I look back on living for Christ as a younger man, I cannot duplicate that now. I don't have the strength. I do not regret 18-hour days as a single man witnessing on the streets. But I would have regretted it if I hadn't done it. While you have strength, live for Him. Live for Him now while you have strength. Now, it says here in Isaiah, we go back to Isaiah, and he says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. These words communicate, I've written, the settled, undisturbed sovereignty of Him who does according to His will in the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. Now look at that. Settled, undisturbed sovereignty. My wife always gets mad at me because sometimes I still shake my leg when I'm sitting down. There's no shaking of the leg on that throne. There's no nervous twitch. There's no questioning in His mind of how things are going to go. Perfect peace because He has absolute control of everything. He works all things after the counsel of His will. He's also, it says, lofty and exalted. The Son is seen above all authority and power in heaven and on earth. Matthew Henry writes, this throne is high and lifted up above all competition and contradiction. You see, competition is laughed at in this throne room. Contradiction is just literally mocked. There's no place for it. None at all. Now that's not the case with even the greatest of men. They can be contradicted. They can be questioned. Here, it's a sin. Absolute, perfect knowledge, perfect righteousness, perfect power. No room for contradiction. It says, with the train of His robe filling the temple. The robe which filled the temple seems to portray the expanse of the Son's majesty and the extent of His sovereignty. They reached everywhere and filled everything. Now realize this. His robe, His royalty, His authority, His power, His splendor, His preeminence filled every place. There wasn't a